Likewise. And I was just sharing with you before we got started on the recording on why I have you on the podcast today. And I was sharing with you how I came to learn that grief is an emotion.
Mm.
Throughout life, at school, in society, in medical school, we're always taught that grief is a process. You go through it. There's the 5 stages. You might go back and forth along those 5 stages, but eventually you come to acceptance. And then I was introduced to this whole world of grief as an emotion. And that's what I want to share and unravel that myth of grief being something that has a beginning and an end, and we get to lock it away and put it away.
Yeah.
Um,
Because as you know, as being a doctor, that grief has the most devastating effect on the body if it's pushed down and held in. So this is why it's very important for us to have these conversations and to look at grief as an emotion means that it's going to come in waves. Okay, so the main thing really is that when somebody gets triggered further down the line by a memory or something that then sets them off crying, most people then start having to go at themselves to say, I should be over this by now.
exactly.
And that's where we need to really sort of bust through that myth, because there is no such thing when you've lost somebody that you love from moving on from that. What we do is we find a place in our hearts to accept that they're not physically with us anymore, but they are forever in our hearts. And anybody that's struggling with a broken heart, having lost somebody, can actually be picked up on an ECG machine. So it's not a fantasy or something that's in somebody's head when they are carrying that pain of loss. If anybody comes across patients in your case that is struggling, then it's something that I would love to have a conversation about, because to me, everybody's unique. So there's no format for this. There's no regimen. There's no tick box, which is interesting when you mentioned that process that people are used to being shown that was actually developed for something else and taken and grief applied to it. I mean, the first stage is denial. I mean, was no denying Andrew had died. The body was right there, you know, but it can be the trauma of it that'll come into and sort of repeat itself. As you know, the dopamine drops down and you can't string a sentence together in those first few days.
Mhm.
And until that starts to dissipate in the following weeks, that's when I think people would say, "Oh, the that phase is finishing,"
Yes.
because the denial part is not that you're not denying it, and it's you end up going into some sort of coping mechanism because you have things thrown at you to deal with that you didn't really think you were going to have to deal with. Um, so if anybody's going through this right now, and you've got somebody that will offer to help and you can trust, delegate. That is my part. That delegate. Anybody that can do something, just ask them to do it, because it's enough for you to have to sit and think about the connections that we make.
Beautiful. Now, another myth going off of what you've just said that a lot of us think about is grief is related only to a bereavement.
Mm,
And actually, it's the
no.
same emotion. When you see it as an emotion, it's connected to so many things in life,
Yeah.
and just loss in itself.
And loss is defined as an end of a familiar pattern of behavior. So
Mm.
anything that you've done on a regular basis that stops is a loss. It's just depending on how attached you are to that loss as to how much you will grieve. So, you know, if you took the bus every day and all of a sudden you've got a car, that's not so much a loss, but you might have been talking to people or had a nice bus driver who you've built a relationship with, and you're not going to see them anymore. I mean, that's very, very simple way of saying that's the starting point of some things. To a divorce, a relationship falling through, your health, getting news from you guys that you've not been looking after your health and you've got to address that. Finances, all of these things, when when they've stopped, it can be a career, it can be you've been made redundant, it can be that you've actually got promotion and you're leaving your team. And in so doing that, you've also got to step into a management role. So you can lose the camaraderie you've had with them because you've now got to be a different person. There's so many different variations of it.
Where I've heard resilience used a lot is within the medical profession. We're always taught that, okay, we need to build resilience or increase resilience in order to be able to cope with all the hardships that we see and have to deal with, and the stress. And nowadays, especially through COVID and after COVID, it's not just unique to the medical profession. Everybody is talking about this essence of burnout.
Yes. Put
And
that pressure on yourself.
exactly.
Yeah.
And I always disliked the word resilience because I didn't feel like building resilience was what I needed to do, but it was more balancing out between those pressures, not building myself up to be able to match those pressures and deal with them, but rather how to calm everything down. And I love what you're sharing there, is that aspect of nature or community and bonding with your loved ones in different ways, and bringing in that fun with board games or something that is non-screen, let's say.
On screen, and the importance of the vagus nerve, because I was, I sort of went through. I mean, it's Google, so you could probably, like a doctor would go in, really Google, but I googled the nerve, and I like dizziness, lack of sleep, all of these different things. I could
Mm-hmm.
actually tick them off for myself right now. And I'm thinking that, oh, am I not getting out in the fresh air enough? And yet I would think I was somebody that does go out in the fresh air enough. But I know that I could tick off an awful lot of those things when the vagus nerve is not doing its job well enough, and what I need to do to support it. So it's very interesting to think about those things in the context of resilience, I think.
Exactly. And just how I really like the word supporting. It's what can we build in to support our system, our bodily systems, mental, emotional systems, and the systems that we have in place day to day, that work-life integration. It's all a network of systems that we have in place, ones that serve us and ones that don't. And once you have lots more that are serving you in your direction of where you want to go in life, then I guess that's equivalent of what they say in terms of building resilience.
Yeah. Well, if you think about some of the things you guys have to deal with as doctors and seeing people leave this world, you know that that there's a spirit there, that because the energy of that body is dissipated as soon as that person dies, right?
Mm-hmm.
I take a little while for all the equipment to start telling you that that person's definitely gone, but you know that person, well, in our world it's spiritual. I know some doctors just think you'd gone, but I know that I feel the same way, that there is a spirit that leaves the body where matter and energy is making its transition. And when we think about that, when we're talking about this and the vagus nerve and the fact that you guys are getting all this pressure put on you and you're running around doing what you need to do, but you're not thinking about the vessel and what we're doing to look after the vessel and the spirit that, because if you don't look after yourself, where are you going to live? So it's kind of, catching those moments when we start to think about, how am I looking after myself? And as a mum, it was always I was last in that ballpark. It was always my late husband, or it was my children. And it was hard to even stop doing that role now. I
Yeah.
myself, you're not the mother, but the mothering instinct is there, but you still need to stop. And I'm getting so much more better at it now. I say, no, actually, Diane, what do you want to do? And that, she's smiling because she knows how a bigger impact that is for me to stop and say, what do you want? Because I'm just always sort of put everybody else and their needs first. And it's been a challenge, and I'm getting better at it. But it's when I stopped and I thought, right, okay, there's things that are not working right in my body. That is when I reached out to you, and still a work in progress, but we're working on it well. What else do you need to do? If you were to stop and ask yourself, what do you want to do this weekend? What would it be?
Yeah.
Bring everything back into, instead of running around the office or running around the hospital or doing everything else, and people asking you, oh, you're off this weekend, could you do extra hours? Having that ability to stand in and say, actually, no, sorry, I can't. Do you feel like you have to bring up an excuse?
Exactly. That's definitely, I'm glad you brought that up, because that was one thing that I always struggled with. Like you say, when it's taking on an extra shift because you feel, oh, I'm helping my colleagues, we're spreading the load, and often even cancelling other plans in order to go to work, and feeling like if I was going to say no, it would require an excuse and a reason. And
Yeah.
actually, in any phase of life, whatever it is, if we want to say no, we get to say no, and that's it, leave it at that. But it's a habit to get used to, just saying no, and because doesn't come into it, it's just no, thank you, but no.
Yeah. And having that, and it's going to feel, if you've never done something like
Yeah.
that before, it's going to feel really, really hard.
Mm-hmm.
So taking it back a bit into some steps to give yourself some room. It's good for you to be able to say something like, that sounds really fun, except for the working extra shifts, I'm sure. This sounds really fun. Is just let me check my diary and I'll get back to you. It kind of gives you that space so you can decide.
Yeah, I always say it's like a muscle that you get to build. You
Yeah,
practice saying no to small things, and over time it becomes
yeah,
easier.
yeah, yeah.
So we did touch on this idea that doctors, and it extends to other people as well, but doctors specifically, in a hospital setting, let's say it's a busy shift, and they go from one patient to another, and part of that could be that they have to go and verify that somebody's passed away.
Mm.
And then they're back straight into their shift again. There's none of this time allowed to process, or even a difficult patient, or something that's caused them a lot of emotion, and then it's straight back to the next thing. Are there any tips or strategies that you could offer that can be used in those sorts of settings to just recalibrate, to be able to
That's
continue? And then at the end of a shift, for instance, how can they dump all of that? What's a good way to clear that energy?
clear, that energy. I think you need to acknowledge your own feelings, because often when we experience something like that, I mean, it could be that the person that's died or passed reminds you of somebody in your own life. So you could be triggered by something like that. Or you know that you've got somebody that's alive in another room that you've got to get to.
Yeah.
And you feel dismissive of the people that you've just had to run in and say, I'm signing the papers, sorry, they're dead, and off you go. I try, if you can, in those moments, to take a breath. And I know that the phrase that I'm sorry for your loss is what they generally say. And before I experienced that loss, um, I thought, oh, well, that's just a throwaway comment. But actually, for a doctor to stop and actually say to me, I'm sorry for your loss, meant a lot. Though I have to say, I haven't experienced that, because the ones that were around me were extremely supportive. In fact, so much so that the specialty nurse that had been dealing with my husband had a little meltdown. And that you know, he phoned me later to apologize, saying it was so unprofessional. And I said, please don't. I said, it was absolutely wonderful to see that you
Mhm.
cared about your job and my husband that much, that you were touched. So if you feel that you're going to have a moment, have it, you know, it's the stiff upper lip and that's not professional. That does, people don't buy that anymore. I mean, when I was a kid, sorry about this, Radha, but doctors were generally put on a pedestal.
Yeah.
And now, because we're more interactive and we can ask more questions and we're not frightened to ask those questions, that gap's moved a little bit more, because we still acknowledge that you're the experienced person with all the knowledge because you've like been to doctor school. But the human side of it, don't ever lose the human side of your profession and what you're doing. And I know that can be very, very difficult for some doctors. If you don't feel comfortable about doing it in that space with those people, then decide and allow yourself that space afterwards and have somebody to talk to. You know, it's been a shitty shift today because I've had to deal with X, Y, and Z. And as much as you feel for the family who's just lost one, you've also been dealing with a family that are struggling to keep somebody on this side of things in, you know, especially if you're in A&E, keep them alive. We talk about boundaries around an awful lot of things to help us cope with certain circumstances, but we still allow ourselves that space to connect and to breathe into what we've just been through ourselves.
Mhm.
So if it's a case of you struggling because you've saw the end of a patient, you know, give yourself that space and reach out and talk to somebody who will just listen to you, create space to listen to you, offload what it is that you feel that you need to offload. And if it's triggered an emotion within you, do not ignore it. Go and find somebody to work on it, because unresolved grief has the most devastating effect in our body. If we keep swallowing this emotion down and try and push it down into that box and put the lid back on again, that's the professional box. So I can't let any of what's in that come out and affect me. It will do one day, and it will be burnout or something like that, because you cannot keep your foot on that lid any longer. So find somebody like Radha who understands you, and just allow yourself that conversation, allow yourself that space to talk. It'll be the best thing you ever do, and it will relieve that tension that you're holding in, and then your body's not going to feel it. And your vagus nerve will be a lot happier because you've done it, because you're in professional mode. You're doing what you need to do. That's what you're trained to do. But there's always that catch up afterwards. So we need to stop and think about that. Don't ignore yourself in any of it. The other thing I need to just point out to some doctors is that if you're faced with somebody who's telling you that they're feeling depressed, or they're feeling anxious, or they're feeling stressed out, and you've got your 5-minute window to talk to them, especially if you're a GP,
Mhm.
if they've come with those things, to not be quick enough to just say, right, okay, here's the medication for that. That person might be finding that there is unresolved grief coming to the surface. Their bereavement might have been years ago, but they lost their pet at the weekend. So this is when it's coming up, or they might have had a relationship that's fallen apart. This is coming up, but it's all leading back to unresolved grief that they've been pushing down inside. So I know that we can offer them talk therapies through the services these days, but we also know that there's waiting lists. So it might be good for them, especially if it's a regular GP who knows them. Do you think this might be connected to the grief that you've experienced? Or indeed, even if you don't understand necessarily pets, because I know some doctors don't have pets and don't really make those same connections. But some of us, especially if it's a childless couple, those animals are their children. So it's not being dismissive of that, and actually saying, do you think you could possibly be grieving? Because even acknowledging that in itself can help them a lot.
Mhm.
Stop feeling stuck in their grief. Because time is the biggest myth going. Time of being a healer is the biggest myth going. Somebody like myself who's lost a husband could be fearful of the future.
Yeah.
But identifying those two things and the words that come up with the person means it's something that you can do something about. The loneliness is part of all of that as well. Okay. And then that's when somebody will isolate themselves because they've been grieving and they've been taught to grieve alone.
Mm.
And they're still not finding their way out of it. So they've stayed in it. And so the loneliness creeps in. And now you've got issues where you've got somebody medically, you're trying to get them out the house now. You've got all sorts of services involved to try and get them out of a house. And then so the other one is comparing yourself to somebody else. Now, I can meet another widow. I can empathize with her. We can have a conversation. But I do not know how she feels.
Mhm.
And she does not know how I feel. Nobody in this world knows how you feel about anything, only you. So to say to somebody, I know how you feel, it can actually be a rag to a bull. So just don't do it. And it'll be really hard to do because, you could be in a room where somebody's just died. The person they've lost is their grandparent, and you could come out with, I know how you feel, because you're trying to comfort that person. So you can empathize by saying, I too have lost my grandparent and I am so sorry for your loss. Or there is just no words that I can tell you at this time to bring you comfort. And I am so, so sorry. Because it's the truth. That is going to have a bigger impact and hit that spot for somebody than you saying, I know how you feel. So that's the top tip from Di is to don't tell a patient you know how they feel, because you don't for anything.
That was incredible. And I know our listeners are really going to have a lot to take away from this, a lot of value in caring for themselves, caring for the patients, even everybody else to care for themselves, going through grief and having a better understanding of it.
Yeah. Set yourself up a little ritual if you need to after you come out from
Yes.
work. Whether it's that you're going to allow yourself to have a nice hot Epsom salt soak.
Yes.
Love the Epsom salt soaks. Treat yourself to something nice. You go and stand outside in the grass with your feet on the grass. That's a really good grounding one. Know that you are not responsible for everybody in this world. They are responsible for themselves. There's an element of a doctor that, trying to save somebody, that responsibility you will take on board. But ultimately, you're doing your job and you're doing it to the best of your ability. And that's all you can possibly give somebody. So be kind to yourself as well.
Honestly, Di, hearing that from a non-medic, it hits so much harder and truer because you've been on the other side, and we say it to each other as doctors, but it doesn't resound as highly until somebody outside the ring, if you like, says that to you. And then you know, okay, I am only one person that can do my best.
Yeah.
And like you say, I'm not responsible for
Yeah.
every single person and for everything that happens.
Well, if anybody ever wants to have a conversation with me about this, then please just feel free to get in touch. I'm more than happy to talk about this subject. I want people to talk about this subject. And at the moment, I'm on a bit of a mission, as you know, Radha, to try and get parents and teachers to start talking to children about this.
And I'm glad you brought that, because that links beautifully to last week's interview I did last week, the conversation I had with Anne Sue about how we compliment children in a way, rather than telling them that it's an identity, that you are smart or anything like that. It's complimenting the effort. You did the best that you could in this situation. And like,
Exactly. And even in your profession, you strive, or you're compared to different people in different grades within your your structure. But as from a patient's point of view, yes, we would like you to know the stuff, but it was more sort of, if a doctor says to me, we need to go and look into that, or we need to research that for you, I'm going to have more faith in that person than the person that tries to say to me that yes, well, no, it's fine, I know what we're doing now. And you feel like, do you really? Because people do know. So it's okay for you to say that and step into that, and not thinking that you can't do that because there's a doctor in the next ward or whatever that knows it, or you think they know it. They could be playing that game. So it's about being yourself and not feeling that you need to compare yourself to anybody else in your profession. You be the best version of you that you can be, but acknowledge yourself for all the stuff that you've done in the process of getting to that place. And that's not, all of us, and not just doctors, but all of us need to do that on a more regular basis.
yes,
We've actually
absolutely.
done for ourselves to get us to where we need to be, and embrace it, and know that we are unique. And if you're going to compare yourself to anybody, compare yourself to yourself. You got 60 last time. It's a big leap to get 100. So just say, right, okay, we're aiming to get more than the 60. And where we land is where we are. How would that
Absolutely.
feel going into it, right? You'd be more revved up to do it, wouldn't you?
Yeah. And you probably end up doing better than you anticipated as well, just from that mindset shift.
Yeah, exactly. And sort of all the steps and all the things you've had to do to get you to where you are now, that you can even sit those exams. You did them, no one else did them.
Yeah.
Acknowledge it. I do that as an exercise, I say, put your hand up in the air, bend it, now put it back and pat yourself on the
And
back.
pat yourself on the back. Yes, I love that.
There's it, you just reminded me of something else actually when we were doing that. For anybody that's feeling really, really tough, had a tough shift, and they're really, really struggling, the best and quickest way you can change your state, change your mind, is to change your state. So the best thing you can do is put some headphones on and dance like a child. Dance like nobody's watching. Dance like you just don't give a poop about anything. And allow your body to move. And you doing this changes the energy in your body, which changes the way you feel quickest, that changes the way you are thinking.
Yeah.
So that's a quick tip.
Very powerful one that I use with my clients as well, and with many of the students and doctors I speak to, is just that shift in putting your shoulders back, lifting your head up, and just putting a smile on your face. And you try and be sad, depressed, scared, any of those things, and then throw in a few gratitudes in there, and within a few seconds, not even minutes, you can be in a completely different state of mind.
Yeah. Well, this one, just put your hands above your head and clasp your hands together. Pull in.
Can I give it a go?
You can't help but take a deep breath in when you do that.
Ah, yes. And then you relax.
Keep doing that. It's great.
Beautiful
Tips and tricks.
Listen, beautiful. Thank you so much for being here. And what is one final takeaway that you can give everybody?
Take a breath. Put yourself in that calmer place, and then you can respond to stuff rather than just diving in and reacting to it.